Hello and thank you for joining us on today's edition of Gender Agenda. I am Adora Onyechere. Do connect with us like we always tell you via any of our social media handles, and that will be displayed on your screen for your view and your suggestions. Did you know that gender equality in Nigeria was at 0.3333% in 2020? A baseline research on women's political participation in Nigeria conducted by Gender Strategy Advancement International revealed that since 1999, women's representation in government at all levels has not reached the 35% benchmark set by the National Gender Policy. Now, according to the research, Nigeria has had a total of 654 senators and 2,160 members in the House of Representatives, but out of these, we have had only 37 female senators and only 120 female members of the House of Representatives. Now, these amounts to a mere 5.6% and 5.5% representation, respectively. Now, the research further revealed that between 1999 to 2015, LGA chairpersons were 9% female and 91% male, while councillors were 5.9% women and 94.1% within the same period. The political marginalization of women in Nigeria further played out in the recent ministerial appointment and, of course, cabinet reshuffling, where the President Muhammadu Buhari appointed 7 new ministers and all 7 were male. Now, GSI and the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism says, well, this is not good enough, and says this is totally unacceptable. Now, when the government continues to pay lip service to social inclusion and social justice, the nation will continue to remain grossly underdeveloped for a very long time to come. So, this is a call to action to build a greater Nigeria to uphold gender accountability and social inclusion at all levels. And this research also shows that 94.5% of women have been excluded from the Senate. And this is also reflected in the Nigerian budget, where less than 1% of the 2022 budget is allocated to women's economic empowerment. It is imperative to question if this is enough to encourage the financial inclusion of women at even the community level. Are the Ministry of Women Affairs proactive enough at the state level to have an inclusive structure that looks at women's missing decimal point? The allocation for women economic empowerment for 2022 is pegged at 101 billion naira. Where are the monies? And who is in charge of making sure that these conversations do not only stop at the center? How will the policies be demonstrated through implementation if process of implementations are not carried through due to misappropriation of funds, and of course sometimes misapplication of funds, and the key beneficiaries are also excluded? And these are some of the areas that the government and the leading institutions of women should look into and perhaps provide answers. We would also like to tell you that the Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, has appealed the litigation process involving Nigerian women against the federal government on the affirmative action ruling won by the women. Now, Malami's action followed the recent letter delivered to him and the president condemning the all-male ministerial appointments recently made. And we have details of that in our Women in the News segment. Now, can democracy really thrive without a subnational media and its role in inclusion? That's our topic for today, as we will be joined by a lawyer and gender justice advocate Omowomi Ogunrotimi to discuss this immediately after Women in the News and Voices segment. Do stay with us.
A British politician of Nigerian descent, Kemi Badenoch, and 10 other politicians from the Conservative Party have declared interest to become the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom by September 5. Badenoch announced her intention to run, saying she would run on a smart and able centre-right vision. Badenoch is one of the top 5 contenders of the seat, centering her campaign around tax cuts, low regulation, and attacking UK's net zero target, saying too many policies like the net zero target set up with no thought of effects on industries of the poorer parts of this country. Tax cuts is perhaps an attractive campaign headline for aspirants and contenders following the current financial realities in the UK and its effect on Britons. Badenoch, like other aspirants, will need to have 20 MPs backing her at the end of Tuesday in order to get into the first round of voting. Badenoch, a 42-year-old born to Nigerian parents, spent some part of her childhood in Lagos and later returned to the UK at 16. Hundreds of women groups, led by the Nigerian Women Trust Fund, have described as highly unconstitutional and distraction tactics the appeal of the 35% affirmative action, which was decided in favor of the women groups coalition on April 6 at the High Court sitting in Abuja. The Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, on behalf of President Muhammadu Buhari, has appealed the litigation process involving Nigerian women against the federal government of Nigeria on the affirmative action ruling won by the women. It would be recalled that, as reported, after the ruling in April, the President, through the Minister of Women Affairs, Dame Pauline Tallen, congratulated the women's group for the landmark judgment and promised to uphold and implement the court ruling. Speaking with newsmen on behalf of the coalition, the President, Mofilat Fibaji, said Malami's appeal is highly unconstitutional because appeals are usually made within 30 days of a judgment. Therefore, the appeal instituted by Malami and President Muhammadu Buhari showed they both see themselves as above the law and against moves to progress and develop Nigeria as a country, especially going into an election year. The turnaround after their earlier commitment is surprising, to say the least. The women urged all well-meaning Nigerians to join them through all possible means in condemning what it calls the federal government's impunity of the legal system and abuse of the rule of law, and pray their appeal is thrown out of the court. Lamenting that they fought long and hard for the need to include women in Nigeria's democratic and governance processes, and the court agreed with them, hence the earlier judgment. She said it was painful and distracting for Malami to bring this up at this time instead of respecting the court's judgment.
Hi there, welcome to Gender Perspectives, where we spotlight issues affecting women and girls with a view of holding governments accountable and promoting social inclusion at all levels. My name is Deborah Yusuf. Research conducted by Gender Strategy Advancement Initiative revealed that only 36 women have been elected into the Nigerian Senate since 1999, given the percentage of 5.5% for women and 94.5% for men. Not only are women relatively invisible in the political landscape, but there remains an intractable notion amongst Nigerians and even women themselves that politics is for men and women who venture into it are outliers. This is also reflected in the Nigerian budget, where less than 1% of the 2022 budget is allocated to women's economic empowerment. It is imperative to question if this is enough to encourage financial inclusion at all community levels. Is the Federal Ministry of Women Affairs proactive enough at the state levels to have an inclusive structure that looks at women's missing decimal points? The allocation of women economic empowerment for 2022 is pegged at 101 billion naira. Where are these monies, and who is in charge of ensuring that these conversations do not end at the center? How will these policies be demonstrated through implementation if processes of implementation are not followed through due to misappropriation of funds, misapplication of funds, exclusion of key beneficiaries, exclusion of conversation at key levels? These are some of the areas that government and the leading institutions of women should look into and proffer answers. Nigeria as a nation must take the required steps and implement the necessary policies in narrowing its gender gap in areas such as health, education, political participation, and economic empowerment.
Well, thank you so much. And that was Voices there. And I'm sure that you saw some of the statistics reeled out. But interesting enough, the Gender Global Gap just told us that Nigeria ranks 123 out of 146 countries in the Global Gender Gap Index. Well, we've moved 16 places up the gap, but that doesn't mean that we have seen real terms in terms of changes. Are we doing what we can? Yes. But is it enough? Political will, someone would say. And that's why I have with me Omolmi here in the studio. Good morning, good evening, and welcome to the show.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, as always. And I remember Gender Mobile and all the incredible work you're doing.
Thank you.
Yes, well done. So let's look at the statistics against what is in the NUM. Of course, we saw the 35% affirmative action appeal by the federal government. And some will say it's a very sad occurrence.
Absolutely.
And very embarrassing. Countries are looking at how to close the gaps. Countries are looking at how to open up the spaces. Whereas we're here, women are marching on, pushing, trying, lobbying, yet it seems as if there is no political will on the side of government. How worried are you about this?
I am absolutely worried. Honestly, I must say that I am absolutely worried. And I mean, speaking about what recently played out regarding the appeal of, the little, no, I won't call it a little victory because it looks so much like a big victory, and we're just still in that mood of, celebrating what was recently won. And then we stumbled on this in the news that the federal government, is appealing the judgment, upholding the implementation of the 35% affirmative action. And it calls for so much to be desired. And I would say that this is actually a reflection of the patriarchal nature, of the Nigerian society. We keep talking about this, and it also shows that government is demonstrating lip service to see that women are empowered. I was reading through the grounds of appeal, and I saw actually that, it really calls to question the intention of the government towards, the treaties, the protocols that Nigeria is a signatory to. And I'll give a critical example. So, for example, the learned judge actually upheld the implementation of that section or that provision because the learned judge sees that it amounts to a violation of the human rights of people, of women, of a group of people who are equally Nigerians. And it's quite unfortunate that one of the grounds of the appeal is that the national gender policy has no bearing with Chapter 4 of the Nigerian Constitution. That is preposterous. If you look at, the rationale for the national gender policy, the opening statement actually, started with gender discrimination. And when you look at gender discrimination, it's in all its shades, in all its sizes, you talk about historical marginalization of women. And when we then fall back on the relevant section, I think section 14 of the Nigerian Constitution, which was heavily relied upon before determining that case, it provides that the Federal Republic of Nigeria shall be a state based on the principles of democracy and social justice.
Absolutely.
So what then do you call social justice? What then do you call democracy? It further states that the formation of the government, in terms of its agencies, in terms of its ministries, and even in the way it conducts its affairs, shall be done in a way that there is no, predominance of a group of people from a particular ethnic group. So what exactly is happening? And someone says that this is not a matter that has to do with the fundamental rights of a group of people in Nigeria. How terrible can we actually get in this country?
So you're looking at, it's not just a case about a group that is disenfranchised. You're also looking at the vulnerable group. You're not just talking about women. You're also talking about women living with disabilities as well.
Absolutely.
In that number.
Absolutely.
And, we have seen a lot of statistics reeled out about how much, funds are going into women empowerment, community development, especially at the rural levels for women. But in real time, and I'm asking this question because we've seen the tireless effort of the Ministry of Women Affairs at that level to lobby, to have, backstage conversations with those at the executive, the parliament, to saw what happened to the 5 gender bills, and counting. In real time, the voices are ever increasing. But then in output, it seems there is a brick wall between what we expect and that of the political will of the executive. What do you think is the deadlock? Is it that they do not understand the role of women in development at the point in this nation's livelihood? As we go into a 2023 election,
right.
What is the disaster with that outcome to expect?
So this disaster is obviously staring us in the face, and I would say it's a combination of several factors. Yes, you know, the lack of the political will, and there is no how we can take away our present from our past. You know, I mean, at the point when we were colonized by the Europeans, a lot of things went wrong, and I think I would like to provide a bit of background as to what we actually had, you know, in pre-colonial Nigeria, where we ran, you know, a monarchical system of government, and at the time women were vibrant, active, they were dispensing justice in palace courts. You know, women were queens, women were regents upon the yeah, and that reminds me of, it's thanks to history. History taught us about Queen Amina, you know, of Zaria, who was an empire builder, who ruled our community. And I'm coming home to or southern Nigeria. I learned about Queen Moremi.
Yeah.
You know, I learned about the Kiriji War, how women took
the Aba Women's Riot.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly. And actually the Aba Women Riot was an emergence of, you know, the way the voices of women were stifled, you know, during the colonial era. So when you think about this, how women were vibrantly, you know, active in pre-colonial era, and actually the decline that we experienced, you know, during the colonial advent, one would have thought that colonization would actually even come with a lot of, you know, ice pegs here and there, but sadly it wasn't the same for women. So I would say again that we can't take our present from our history. We need to go back to history. We need to look at what was before we actually got to this point. And I recall, for example, also that in the First Republic we had just one female senator out of 91. In the Second Republic we had just one too, and we had 11 female reps out of 445. That is an insignificant fraction. And when you look at what obtains today, it feels like, yes, we've made some little wins here and there. But what played out, or what is playing out now, I would say that in some sense is capable of reversing all the progress we've made so far. So we're taking it by force, obviously, because we're seeing that also conversations around the table is not working, especially when we're giving the impression that we don't even have a seat at the table. And if you're not at the table, you would be on the menu, and women, we don't want to be on the menu.
So you
obviously
create your own table, perhaps?
Yeah, yes, we create our own table, and then when we come to the table, we have to keep leaning in. We have to keep our hands up, because if we don't do that, a lot of things will pass us by. But look at what has played out. We went to court. Usually before now, would say because policies lack, you know, this binding effect, it's only persuasive in nature. But we've gone to court to test the life of the policy, to give life to the policy. And I love in the dictum of the learned judge, he said that this is not just a statement. It has to be backed up, you know, with action. Absolutely. And that is what, you know, Nigerian women are saying, that enough of, you know, this impunity. And that's why we're here, we're trying to unite. But like you said, it requires mutually reinforcing strategies and approaches to see actually that, you know, we get to the end of the road. So
now you look at the conversation of the 2023 election, and you look at, you know, what happened recently with the ministerial appointment, the numbers that are coming out of the budget for 2022, and one would be asking, where are the monies going? Who are these empowering? Because you see less women in this space, you see less women in decision-making, you know, platforms. You also see the parliament very masculinized, and from what we saw, a lot of them may not even come back, but they are also being replaced by men. So you're looking at the 2023 where we are asking questions about who will be able to look at the voice and bridge the gap for women. And I don't know if you've seen any candidates so far speaking the language of inclusion. So not quite, yeah. I mean, people might probably, you know, show it in terms of their body language, but I think that it's high time we began to engage people and actually document some of these conversations. You would see that what played out in the court recently, that part of the exhibits, you know, was some of the conversations that were documented at the point where our leaders, our president was assuring Nigerians or women that he was going to, you know, make good his promises. It was part of the exhibits in court. Imagine if we didn't have that. So I feel that there is a level of conversation that we need to start, or we need to consolidate on. I feel that beyond the town hall forums debates that we usually hold, there needs to be, you know, a fit for purpose or a tailored debate where it's just focused on issues affecting women, and this has to be documented. It's interesting how women are always at the center of mobilization, you know, during elections, politics, because I mean, in terms of the strength, in terms of you know, the capacity, we actually have it. But when it comes to leadership,
They engage, they encourage us to participate in terms of mobilizing people coming out in our numbers to vote. But when it comes to leadership, we are marginalized. And I feel actually also that if it's possible, the people who are actually vying for this position should be made to actually sign like a charter to show that they are committed to this. And if they assume office and they don't do the needful, then we go to court again. We've seen it, it has worked for us. I think this should actually be documented as a best practice. And I would also say, in addition to that, that I really look forward to better days. I hope that the government that is appealing this judgment would actually retrace their steps and probably apologize to Nigerian women that, you know, they've actually heard by even appealing this judgment in the first place.
Do you think that there's a sense of misogyny with this current administration? Because then you look at the fact that the parliament also stepped down the 5 gender bills without the protest of Nigerian women standing days under the sun in front of the National Assembly. Perhaps those first 2 that were gotten will not even have been reviewed. But then talking about, you know, I keep going back to the will, because again, is the will against the law. And so you have the law, and then you have implementation, and you have the human rights conversation around the law. The government, whether at the local government level, at the state level, and then now at the executive, seems to be paying lip service, not just to its promises, which you mentioned earlier, but the fact that they are emboldened to stand tall in the confusion of misleading the rest of Nigerians that these actions are in the best interest of the country. What is the danger in that, especially for us amongst other Committee of Nations?
So I would say that the danger in that is that, like I did say, the little progress or the progress that we've made so far, you know, would be reversed if we are not careful. So, for example, look at what happened during COVID. There was a significant uptick in sexual and gender-based violence cases because all of these issues are, you know, intertwined. But back to what you said, I would say again that yes, misogyny plays a role, but I would say if we do not get women into those spaces, is it not preposterous that men sit and they decide on issues affecting women? It's difficult for them to even know where the shoe pinches. So how do you expect them to come up with policies that would address, you know, effectively the issues affecting women? And I would say that until the government shows that the lives of women are worth saving, then we are not, you know, we shouldn't even be talking about this at all. Another thing is that we might begin to think about the fact that do we actually dismantle the barriers first and get women into those spaces, or we get women into those spaces and then think about dismantling the barriers, whichever one. That's why I talked about harnessing those, you know, approaches, strategies, and as women activists, we all need to come together to also see that those wins actually trickle down even to the state level, to the local government level.
Absolutely, and one would say, you know, transparency in all that process as well. I mean, it's very interesting to have conversations where Nigerian women lead in other countries, take, you know, positions of authority, and are key decision makers in other countries and other platforms across world, you know, economy. But when it comes down to Nigeria, we lack that voice, we lack that inclusion. And, you know, often they would say, oh, women should stop agonizing and start organizing. And now for once, women organized, went to court, got the judgment. And now the federal government is saying, nahi, we're not actually going to toe that line. And in 2023, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of call. People are getting their voters, you know, card. And a lot of people are saying, vote out a government that has not served the people. But do you think that the consciousness of women also, who are going to the elections to vote, should also be about voting out a government insensitive to a proactive government?
Absolutely, and women need to be more aware. We have the numbers. I talked about leveraging our numerical strength. It's quite unfortunate that people have had to circle back to the, you know, occurrence that happened during the APC primaries about the woman who actually stepped down rather than even going forward to see what the outcome would look like. But be that as it may, I feel that we should actually not relent. I feel that we should still leverage our numbers to see what happens.
Absolutely.
And I also feel that, you know, as the women community, we should continue to organize. In terms of consistency, as long as we remain consistent, then, you know.
Okay, let's quickly take our About Now segment, because we're going to round up in a few seconds, and then we'll come back, and then we'll definitely be wrapping up.
45 women selected from Grand Cape Mount, Gombe, and Gabapolo countries have received certificates after completing a 1.5-month training in the production of eco stoves. The training was organized by the Environment Protection Agency in partnership with Green Gold Liberia and supported by UNDP Liberia through its energy and environment program. The initiative is linked to livelihood diversification and access to renewable energy to support vulnerable communities, especially women, youth, and people with disabilities, to promote socio-economic inclusion. It is also important for the successful implementation of Liberia's national determined contributions, which has as one of its targets the production of 300,000 eco stoves or energy efficient cook stove by 2030. Serving as keynote speaker at the graduation ceremony held in Tomerburg, Bome Country, Vice President Joe Howard Taylor admonished the graduates to put the training into practice, noting that the use of the eco stove is important for environmental management and promote good health, safety, and empowerment.
Well, thank you so much, and that's the much we can take on the show. I would like to say thank you to Justice Advocates and, of course, Gender Advocate as well, Momi. It's been great to have you discussing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
And all the best to the Nigerian women as well.
Thank you.
All right, my name is Adora Onyetere. Thank you so much for staying with us. But to the federal government is an absolute insult on the socio-psychological well-being of Nigerian women to uphold that, Kate. And it's a shame on the brand Nigeria as we even look at a slimmer gap for women's inclusion. Do the right thing. See you again next week. But side by side in true equality. So sing a song for women everywhere. Let it ring around the world and never, never cease. So sing a song for women.